Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. The Philippine government lowers its growth target once again, citing global uncertainty and weakening economic momentum. The country's budget deficit balloons to over 500 billion pesos in the first 5 months of the year as spending outstrips revenue. Iran denies plans to meet with the United States next week, contradicting claims made by President Donald Trump. Let's take a look at how global financial markets performed overnight. Wall Street finished higher Thursday as the ceasefire between Israel and Iran continued to hold. Investors also welcomed fresh data that strengthened the case for a U.S. Fed rate cut later this year.
I think if you look at what's leading the market, and certainly today as well as in recent weeks, there's three main areas that really stand out. Growth stocks, led by obviously a lot of the technology names and consumers, communication service companies. I think they benefit with interest rates going lower. They can sort of expand their multiples, right? People can pay more for those stocks as interest rates go lower. And that's an area that's been rebounding very strongly off the April lows and continues to provide leadership. We just saw the NASDAQ make all-time new cycle highs this week. So that's confirmation that that trend is still intact. And if we look elsewhere in the market, it's not just tech and growth stocks. Financials have been leading, primarily in the financial services area. That's where the brokers and asset managers are. Some of the crypto-related exchanges are there as well. That's been driving it. But the other side are the banks, and they've been notable laggards. Now, they're having a pretty decent day over the last couple of days.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 0.9%, the S&P 500 up by 0.8%, and the NASDAQ higher by 1%. Over in Europe, markets there were mixed. The FTSE 100 inched up by 0.2%, Germany's DAX higher by 0.6%, and France's CAC 40 flat with a slight downward bias. Now, the Philippines' budget deficit swells to 523.6 billion pesos in the first 5 months of 2025. That's up nearly 30% from last year, raising fresh concerns over debt sustainability. Bureau of Treasury data shows the shortfall rose from 404.8 billion a year ago as the government doubled down on infrastructure spending and social programs. But the bigger deficit comes with a price. Interest payments now account for more than a third of total expenditures. Economists warn that without strong revenue growth, rising debt costs could put our credit rating at risk and slow the fiscal consolidation path. The Philippine economy is expected to grow by 5.6% in the second quarter of the year. That's according to HSBC's ASEAN economist Aris Dakanay, who cites stronger consumption and investment as key drivers of growth. If his projection holds, it would mark a slight acceleration from Q1, but still fall short of last year's second quarter growth of 6.3%. HSBC has also lowered its full-year forecast for the Philippines to 5.4%, down from 5.6%, citing base effects and a more tempered outlook. Now, but even with that modest uptick in growth, the job market is still feeling the strain. A new Job Street report shows that more companies in the Philippines cut jobs in 2024, with layoffs rising across all business sizes. Permanent, full-time employees were the most affected, but firms also shifted toward flexible hiring with a surge in part-time and contractual positions. Despite the cuts, 94% of companies still hired new staff, many citing a need for adaptability and cost control. Bonus payouts increased, but fewer companies gave salary raises, blaming tougher business conditions. Looking ahead to 2025, most companies plan to grow their teams with a focus on agile, skill-based hiring strategies. The Philippines largely escapes the economic shock from the Israel-Iran conflict. That's according to the Department of Economy, Planning and Development, or DepDev, after the two sides agreed to a ceasefire. DepDev Secretary Arsenio Balisacan says a drawn-out war would have weighed on global growth and hurt the Philippine economy, keeping oil prices elevated at $70 to $80 a barrel. The Philippine government cuts its growth targets once again, blaming global uncertainty and mounting domestic headwinds. Sujin Kim has that story.
Philippine economic targets are on a steady downward revision. At the start of 2024, the government was still banking on a 6 to 8% GDP growth range, but by year-end, it was narrowed to 6 to 6.5%. And now the government has cut its 2025 growth target.
The revisions take into account heightened global uncertainties such as unforeseen escalation of tensions in the Middle East and the imposition of U.S. tariffs.
And it doesn't end there. Exports are now expected to contract 2% this year, signaling a slowdown in global trade that's putting pressure on the country's growth trajectory. The peso is expected to hold steady at 56 to 58 per dollar, while global oil prices are seen averaging between $60 to $70 per barrel, far from the triple-digit scenarios feared in earlier outlooks.
Tempered by easing global demand and expected increases in global oil inventories, the Dubai crude oil prices are expected to average between 60 to 70 US dollar per barrel from 2025 to 2028, despite escalating geopolitical tensions.
With 5 rate cuts since last year, the economic team is betting on easier monetary policy to revive domestic demand.
This is expected to improve credit conditions and support sustained consumption and domestic activity.
One major challenge remains the fiscal deficit, or when the government spends more than it earns.
Fiscal consolidation remains a cornerstone of the government's medium-term strategy. The national government is committed to reducing fiscal deficit while simultaneously ramping up investments in infrastructure, human capital, and social services.
To support this strategy, the government is banking on revenue measures, including the VAT on digital service providers, stronger enforcement, and faster tax digitalization. And despite a tighter fiscal space, the DBCC is proposing the largest national budget in history, 6.79 trillion pesos for 2026, citing that the budget will be used for education, healthcare, workforce upskilling, infrastructure, and digital transformation.
The government is committed to reducing poverty to single-digit levels, creating quality jobs, safeguarding macroeconomic stability.
Sujin Kim, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
The government has once again slashed its growth targets, citing global uncertainty, trade slowdowns, and fiscal pressure. With 2025 GDP now seen at just 5.5% to 6.5%, the big question is, can domestic demand pick up the slack? Joining us now for a closer look at these revised targets and what they mean for markets, investors, and everyday Filipinos is Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation's Chief Economist, Mike Ricafort. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Hi, good morning, Maiki, and to your viewers. Nice to be back.
Okay, Mike, let's start with the government's widely expected downward revision on the full-year growth target to 5.5% to 5.6%, more aligned with reality and consensus forecasts. What were your initial thoughts?
Well, yes, even my forecast is around 5.5% to 6% for this year, and we have seen already revisions, some slight downward revisions, especially by the multilaterals, such as the likes of World Bank, ADB, IMF, as well as the credit rating agencies, the market makers, the major financial institutions locally and globally. So we have seen that those downward revisions over the past 2 to 3 months, especially when Trump, when he was inaugurated, and eventually he pushed through with the higher tariffs, the trade wars, and the protectionist measures that would slow down the global economy per se, because of slowdown in global trade, in investments, and in employment, and indirectly slowing down the local economy as a result. So this is somewhat moving closer to, well, at least it's more realistic and achievable now.
Yeah. More realistic, more achievable, despite the global headwinds. But the question remains, Mike, can our domestic economy pick up the slack? What are your thoughts?
Yes, the Philippines is relatively resilient in the sense that consumer spending accounts for 75% of the economy. So we're largely internally driven rather than export-oriented compared to our neighboring countries. For instance, our exports, the Philippine merchandise exports, are compared to the more developed ASEAN countries, well, theirs is 3 to 5 times higher than us. So they have a bigger headache right now because it's still uncertain. The key date now is July 9. That would be the end of the 90-day pause on Trump's reciprocal tariffs. It has been at 10% baseline. So it's still uncertain because we have been getting word from the market for the past week or two that there's a chance for Trump to, well, of course, anything goes. The decision is on him. He clearly stated that despite the negotiations, the final decision rests on him. And there were talks that the 10% baseline tariffs may be raised to, say, 15% for 150 days. So it's still, well, that's why from the point of view of the world, especially those who export a lot in the US, they cannot really plan very clearly their inventories, their capacities, and of course, when it comes to their new investments, expansion plans. So some of them would be put on hold, and that's slowing things down. And the worst case scenario, if some of these exporting countries may not be able to sell a lot in the US, they may have to sell elsewhere and diversify, and we would get a lot of imports. And we're kind of the markets see that in the Philippines as one of the least affected when it comes to the adverse effects of the slowdown in exports.
And the government is doing what it can, Mike, to cushion the impact. We're spending more. And then let's talk about rate cuts. We've had 5 since August of last year, but loan growth and private investment are still pretty tepid. Is this looser stance on monetary policy trickling through enough? What are your thoughts?
The key manifestations, Mikey, is that you look at the loan growth for all banks. It has been hovering at 11% levels. That's twice faster than GDP growth. So we have seen the total rate cut since last year, around 125 basis points starting August. And that has effectively lowered the BSP rate from a 17-year high of 6.5% last August. It's now down to 5.25%. That's already the lowest in like 2.5 years since November of 2022. So indeed, that reduced funding costs, borrowing costs by consumers, households, businesses, and industries, and even the government and other institutions. So with that, those are supportive of growth. The signals of, that's consistent of what we have been seeing other than the rate cuts, other accommodative monetary measures or monetary easing measures include the 2 sets of RRR cuts last September that infused effectively about nearly 400 billion pesos into the financial system, and also last February, effective March, that infused a total of about 330 billion additional more. So that effectively reduced intermediation costs, reduced lending rates, so to speak, and look at consumer loans. It's
Mike,
growing 24%.
Looking ahead, more rate cuts, more cuts in the reserve requirement ratio. What are your thoughts on how the balance of the year is going to play out?
Well, yes, with the signaling of another 25 basis points cut for the remainder of the year. And prospectively, the Fed officials are of the view, the latest dot plot last week when they met, the Fed officials, they're estimating now 50 basis points cut by the US this year, 25 basis points cut in 2026. That was reduced from the previous estimate of 50 basis points cut, and 25 basis points cut in 2027. That's one of the biggest leads that we have worldwide. And, the BSP would likely match that to maintain the healthy interest rate differentials. And now the interest differential is down to 75 basis points. That's the narrowest ever in our lifetimes. And we have gotten signals recently that it could even be reduced to as low as 50 basis points differential, meaning to say another quarter point cut is in the offing anytime soon, from 5%, from 5.25 to 5% possibly anytime soon, and prospectively to match future Fed rate cuts, and that's going to improve further. That's still, well, it goes to show the policy priorities boosting the economy in view of these external challenges that are beyond the country's reasonable control. The Trump's,
in an effort to boost the economy, Mike, we're spending more. Our budget for this year is a record $6.8 trillion pesos. And we just received word that the budget deficit swelled to 523.6 billion in the first 5 months of 2025. That's an increase of 30% year on year. Are you worried about our debt sustainability? Are you worried that this could hurt the government's fiscal condition and perhaps even put our credit rating at risk?
It's a tough balancing act, Mikey, so to speak, because deficit spending, that's where we are right now. Budget deficits, meaning the government spends more than what it earns in taxes. And that's one way to stimulate economic activity on the fiscal side. On the monetary policy side, as discussed later. So all of which, both fiscal and monetary policies are consistent to prop up economic growth and at the same time encourage further economic development that is more sustainable to more areas around the country and also more inclusive. And the biggest budget allocation has always been education, and after that would be infrastructure and the likes of nutrition, healthcare. It's an investment approach.
Right.
The risk reward. If you look at it, you invest more, lifting more people out of poverty, especially the poorest of the poor, since education is already free from primary, secondary, up to the state colleges and universities in the public schools. So, and sustaining it, making sure to reduce the dropout rates. And so, that's why it's kind of warranted. But of course, fiscal discipline should always be there.
Very important. Okay, Mike, moving forward, if you were a foreign investor looking at the Philippines today with a revised growth target of between 5.5% to 5.6%, plus taking a look at our fiscal position, the budget deficit swelling, what would be on your mind right now? What would be of a concern to you, or what would you be thinking about the Philippines based on these fresh figures?
Well, the first thing to look at from the point of view of the foreign investor and also from a creditor that's lending to the country is the country's credit rating. So far, the credit rating agencies, the highest that we have is from the two Japanese credit rating agencies at A-. That's 3 notches above the minimum investment grade. Now, from the point of view of the Western credit rating agencies, the latest signaling comes from S&P, recently reiterated its positive outlook on the Philippines, and that has been ongoing since November 26th of last year, meaning to say they affirmed their BBB plus rating, that's 2 notches above the minimum investment grade, with a positive outlook. Within 1 to 2 years, normally the parlance is 12 to 18 months, but then again, safely within 1 to 2 years, there's a great chance for an actual credit rating upgrade on the Philippines to A-. That for S&P. That's already that would already align with with JCR and RNI, and it's telling the international community that it's a vote of confidence. Because before they put in billions of pesos or dollars here into the country, they look at that encompasses everything. That's the final rating. That's whether economic growth, monetary policy, inflation, even politics, geopolitics. So
that's right, because our credit rating, that status, it's the biggest scorecard for foreign investors. On another front, Mike, I wanted to bring up an emerging risk. U.S. President Donald Trump is pushing for a 3.5% tax on remittances sent by non-citizens, part of his One Big Beautiful bill, which is now pending at the U.S. Senate. Deutsche Bank says that this could shave off 1.4% of Philippine remittance inflows, equivalent to a tenth of our GDP, at 3.5% tax on our remittances. Are you worried?
Well, not much, because it's relatively negligible. And, there are even questions about it, if how feasible would that be, because there were logistical challenges during the first Trump administration. And if and when it passes, so the amount is manageable in the sense that even the estimates for the possible reduction in remittances would be minimal. And, relative to the size of the remittances, it's all in all, it's $40 billion per year. We're fourth largest in the world after India, Mexico, and China. And we're the biggest sources of nurses. 20% of the world's nurses comes from the Philippines. We're the biggest source of maritime workers, the seafarers, 20 to 25%. So that would well, it would be relatively resilient. If you compare that also with our GIR, at least $105 billion. That's a drop in the bucket. It's relatively small. It's relatively manageable. The worst case scenario, yeah, they would pay up, but realistically, yeah, they may reduce a bit, but 3.5% is relatively affordable for a lot of OFWs, and but better if there's none. And if you look at well, because why that's one of the sources of resilience of the Philippines, and in view of the trade wars. And other than that, other than remittances, which is $40 billion per year, we have BPO revenues. We're number 2 in the world after India. That's $40 billion. The subset of which is customer service. The Philippines has always been number 1 in the world. That's 70 to 80% of total BPO. And the third pillar, the source of dollar earnings, it is the foreign tourism business, earning $13 billion last year. That was a record high. So those three, well, we have, at least those three, that's a source of competitive advantage for the country.
Okay,
And
Mike, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you for the comforting words. That was RCBC's chief economist, Mike Ricafort.
Thank you so much, Mike, and to your viewers.
We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's check on how Asian markets are doing this Friday morning. Now we're seeing a sea of green right now following the gains in Wall Street overnight. The Nikkei 225 is higher by 1.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index up by 0.4%. Shanghai's Composite up by 0.3%. And Singapore's Straits Times Index up by 0.6%. Here at home, Philippine shares ended slightly higher yesterday, Thursday, as easing Middle East tensions continued to calm oil supply fears and lift investor sentiment. PSE index rose by 0.1% to close at 63.31, its third straight gain. Markets remain supported by the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which has cooled crude prices and boosted investor confidence. Value turnover yesterday was healthy at 6.1 billion pesos. But investors are still cautious ahead of Trump's July 9 tariff deadline and his push to fast-track the next Fed chair. Over the short term, investors are eyeing cues from Washington, oil markets, and the BSP. Now, taking a look at our market today, as of 10:31, the main gauge is in the green, up by 0.6% to 63.67. The broader all shares index up as well, up by about 0.5%. Now, the gains in our market are coming from the property counter, which is up sharply, up by 2% in early trade. Now, volume of shares traded is at 139 million, valued at a little over $1 billion pesos. Market breadth is decidedly positive, with 82 advancers, 46 decliners, and 42 stocks unchanged. Checking on the currency market, the peso opened weaker at 56.65 to the greenback, depreciating from the previous close of 56.61. Now, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources opens nearly 1.2 million hectares of forest land for investment under a streamlined plan to boost rural jobs and forest-based revenues. These mostly barren or idle lands have been cleared for development, targeting sustainable enterprises in timber, renewable energy, agroforestry, and bamboo. The DENR says indigenous communities won't be displaced but will be engaged as partners. The goal, to attract private capital while advancing the country's sustainable development agenda. A proposed U.S. tax on remittances could cost the Philippines $100 million in 2026. That's according to the palace. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, pushed by U.S. President Donald Trump, seeks to impose a 3.5% tax on money sent abroad by non-citizens. The bill has cleared the U.S. House and is now under review at the Senate. While the estimated hit is just a sliver of the Philippines' total remittances, economists say it could dampen consumer spending and push fresh pressure on the peso. Even if the macro impact is modest, officials are watching closely given the country's deep dependence on OFW inflows. Now, on another front, violence erupts in Makati, the country's premier business district and financial hub. An SUV was sprayed with bullets Thursday night, raising fresh concerns about safety and security. Authorities have arrested 2 suspects, both Chinese nationals. As investors watch closely, the incident puts a spotlight on law enforcement in high-stakes urban centers. Francis Folve has the details.
The Southern Police Special Operations Unit handed this cell phone video. They can be seen tracking a car allegedly containing firearms. The 2 men from the vehicle were ordered to lie face down on the road. SPD says the 2 suspects were both Chinese. They are allegedly involved in a shooting incident targeting someone at an open parking lot along Amorsolo Street in Makati City. The police are also investigating the names and profiles of the Chinese nationals. An initial investigation reveals the shooters missed their target and the bullets struck the parked vehicle instead. The police further say the victim is in stable condition and is cooperating with the investigation. The 2 will be charged with attempted murder and illegal possession of firearms. SPD is still digging up the motive of the crime. Francis Polbe, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
On another front, a new player is revving into the Philippines' transport sector, and it's coming straight from Vietnam. Backed by aggressive expansion plans and promises of lower costs, this entry could shake up the local bus and truck market and challenge incumbents in the push for modernization. Sujin Kim has the details.
Vietnam is moving quickly to capitalize on the PBBM administration's push to modernize the Philippine transport system. In line with the government's infrastructure agenda, Vietnam's leading commercial vehicle manufacturer, Taco Auto, is now entering the local market through a new distribution partnership for buses and trucks.
We hope to make active contributions to building a safe and modern public transportation system in your country.
Deliveries of 8.5 to 12-meter city and provincial buses are expected to begin in 2026, customized to the needs of local operators. Expected to range from 3 to 4.5 million pesos. And thanks to the Vietnam-Philippines Free Trade Agreement, there's no need for local assembly. The units will arrive fully built.
In terms of investment, they will, again, because of the free trade agreement between the Philippines and Vietnam, there is no need to actually bring the units in completely knocked down, so we can bring them in as completely built already.
At the moment, EVs are not on the table for this Vietnam-Philippine partnership, but even with interest in electric buses and trucks, the industry stakeholders warn that the Philippines lacks the basic infrastructure to support a full shift to EVs.
Because without the infrastructure, I think it is quite difficult for the operators to shift to electric, even as much as they want to. Building the charging stations and all of these things takes a lot of investment. For commercial vehicles, that's very difficult. Their battery capacity is much larger. Therefore, they would need a much bigger charging station.
In the meantime, light and medium-duty trucks are still expected to dominate the market.
The market right now is still fairly slow. On the truck side, if we're talking about the logistics side, meaning the smaller trucks, those are moving. Okay, but if we talk about the bigger trucks, those are a little bit still on the slow side.
Following the launch, BJ Mercantile is calling on the government to establish stronger, clearer policies to help move the industry forward.
The political policies still have to be a little bit firmer, I would say. Implementation of certain policies have to be firm. So I think that's probably what will drive confidence also with our business people.
Meanwhile, the company confirms the bus sector is finally recovering from the pandemic, with operators increasing their fleet modernization programs. Sujin Kim, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
We're taking a quick break. Business 360 will be right back. Welcome back. Vice President Sara Duterte is accusing President Bongbong Marcos of orchestrating her impeachment, saying it's a move to stay in power and neutralize her 2028 presidential bid. In an interview with Russia's state media, Duterte claims the impeachment effort is meant to eliminate her as a political threat.
One particular member of the House of Representatives already said publicly that there was money in exchange for the signatures in the articles of impeachment. Because I am the front runner in the presidential race in 2028, the survey shows that, and I think they want to eliminate the front runner.
Lawmakers, however, deny any political motive, insisting that the process is about accountability.
I strongly denouncing statement na binayaran eh. Yung mga salitang ganyan, it's trying to, evade the real issue. The issue is there's an impeachment complaint filed by a Filipino citizen. Dinala sa Kongreso, we have to act upon it as a constitutional mandated duty by the Congress.
The reason why we are holding these high officials accountable to their actions because we do not want also the culture of impunity to be the dominant rule of the day.
Victims of former President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs are opposing his plea for interim release, warning it could put their lives at risk. In a new court filing, they argue that the safety of witnesses can only be guaranteed if FPRRD remains in detention. The Justice Department, meanwhile, says witness protection will be provided in line with the request of the International Criminal Court.
We already chose not to pursue the cases and let the ICC pursue these cases. Given that, it becomes also our obligation to help them because we are giving up our jurisdiction for their jurisdiction. Kasi nga, ang hirap na i-prove yung case dito at i-build up ang kaso dahil yung mga kailangan mong magsalita ay kasama sa krimen.
A former Senate witness in the human trafficking case against detained Pastor Apollo Kibuloy now claims he was paid to testify, and he's pointing the finger at Senator Risa Ontiveros. Michael Maurilio, a landscaper at Kibuloy's Glory Mountain compound in Davao, alleges that he received 500,000 pesos to testify against Kibuloy and members of the Duterte family. He adds that he was promised another $500,000 if he implicated Senators Bongo and Bato de la Rosa.
Binayaran po ako ni Senri Ontiveros para mag-testify laban kay PRRD, VP Sara at kay Pastor Apollo C. Kibuloy.
This comes months after Senator Ontiveros led a Senate probe into Kibuloy's Kingdom of Jesus Christ, where multiple witnesses accused the pastor of sexual abuse, human trafficking, and financial exploitation. Ontiveros denies Maurilio's claims, calling them fabricated and designed to discredit her work. She says she'll challenge these accusations in court. Kibuloy, a controversial religious leader and ally of the Duterte family, remains in custody on multiple warrants, including human trafficking and sexual abuse. Both Ontiveros and Senator De La Rosa are calling for accountability, even as the case takes a sharp new turn. In other news, from line cutting to a lottery system, the Senate is changing how lawmakers file their first bills. Senate President Chiz Escudero is bringing back a long dormant rule that removes the race to be first. Instead of queuing up, senators will now file their pet bills based on a raffle.
Drawing of lots ang ginawa namin. Pagbabalik yan sa nagdaang practice ng Senado na para patas, parehas. Kasi ang inabutan ko, may priority ang Senate President, tapos yung senior. Ang problema mo, primus inter pares, o pareho lang naman ako dun sa iba. So para sa akin, drawing of lots na lang, hindi ako dapat mabigyan ng prioridad.
The first batch to file starting July 3rd includes JV Ejercito, Robin Padilla, Pia Cayetano, Ting Lacson, Joel Villanueva, Win Gatchalian, Rodante Marcoleta, Jinggoy Estrada, Rafi Tulfo, and Camille Villar. The second batch from July 7th to 10th will be Erwin Tulfo, Mark Villar, Bam Aquino, Chiz Escudero, Kiko Pangilinan, Migs Zubiri, Lauren Lagarda, Lito Lapid, and Camille Villar. We're taking a short break. Business 360 will be right back. Welcome back. No meeting, no movement. Iran shuts down talk of negotiations with the U.S., contradicting President Trump's claim. Iran's foreign minister says there are no plans to meet with American officials next week, dismissing U.S. President Donald Trump's statement that talks were back on. Tehran says it's still weighing whether engaging with Washington serves its interests, especially after recent strikes by the U.S. and Israel on its nuclear sites, which prompted an earlier walkout. The foreign minister confirmed the damage to Iran's nuclear facilities was far from minor, and that scientists are reassessing the country's nuclear roadmap in light of the attacks.
No agreement has been made to resume negotiations now. I'm stating clearly that no agreement has been made, no promise has been made, nor have we talked at all about restarting negotiations. But the fact that we are examining among ourselves what is in the interest of the Iranian people is another discussion. So far, there has been no agreement, no subject for negotiation.
Philippine Ambassador to Israel Eileen Mendiola visits Filipinos in Arad City, temporarily unemployed after Dead Sea hotels shut down amid the conflict in the Middle East. The Philippine Embassy says Mendiola heard their concerns, which will be brought to the Israel Hotel Association. 73 Filipinos received financial aid and relief packages. Embassy officials have also reached out to Filipino hotel workers in Tiberias and Haifa. Now, from the Middle East to Europe, trade tensions are on the agenda. The European Union is now reviewing new proposals from the United States as both sides try to navigate growing pressure to ease tariffs. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said on Thursday that they received the latest U.S. proposals for further negotiations on tariffs. She said that they are studying it, adding that all options remain on the table.
I briefed leaders on the current state of play in our trade talks with the United States. President Trump and I had a good discussion at the G7 summit in Canada. Back then, we agreed to speed up the work with a clear goal, an agreement before the 9th of July. Today, we received the latest U.S. document for further negotiations. We are assessing it as we speak right now. So our message today is clear. We are ready for a deal. At the same time, we are preparing for the possibility that no satisfactory agreement is reached. This is why we consulted on a rebalancing list, and we will defend the European interest as needed. In short, all options remain on the table.
French President Emmanuel Macron, for his part, wants a quick and pragmatic trade deal with the U.S., but he clarifies that they will not accept unbalanced terms.
Under no circumstances will we accept a lasting situation in which we are taxed and, in a way, do not change our position on the matter. Therefore, I support the work done by the Commission to enable a rebalancing of our relationship, because, in total, we are facing an accumulated amount of 60 billion euros in additional duties over a year, and that quite mechanically calls for a response.
U.S. Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson takes viewers inside the U.S. Embassy in Manila, showing off one of its most iconic features, a sweeping view of Manila Bay. In a video posted on X, Carlson says that the Bay view has become a favorite photo backdrop for guests and diplomats alike. But that same view was once at risk after reports emerged that the embassy opposed a 34 billion peso reclamation project proposed by plastics tycoon William Gatchalian, which would have blocked that view. Now, that view remains untouched. Check this out.
Come on in, let me show you around. I cannot imagine that there is a more beautiful view from any U.S. ambassador's office anywhere in the world than this one. I'd also like to show you this beautiful relief map that shows where we are in relation to the bay. This historic building was the U.S. High Commissioner's residence from 1940 to 42, and then was overtaken by the Japanese. To make sure that the U.S. flag that was flying over this building at the time did not fall into enemy hands, the staff lowered the flag, had a ceremonial burning and burial, and that stone marker is where that historic flag remains buried to this day. And I often pose right in this spot. You've probably seen it in the back of many photos with our VVIP visitors. And today, you're our VIP visitors. Thank you so much for following us online.
On another front, after nearly 4 decades as the editor-in-chief of American Vogue, Anna Wintour is stepping down and is currently seeking a replacement. The renowned fashion editor reportedly made the announcement at a morning staff meeting this week. Vogue, known as the Fashion Bible, will replace Wintour at the U.S. edition, but she will stay on as global editorial director. As editor-in-chief, Wintour trailblazed the publication industry, transforming the magazine into a global powerhouse that could make or break trends and designers. All eyes now are on who will take the helm of the fashion world's most influential title. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us, and keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel.